I've been involved in Pretoria for quite a long time, for myself, in praying about things in the city that has an influence on our city. And it's never nice to have something that's brand new. You know, it's sort of all right if things are old because, you weren't there and it wasn't your generation's fault. But when something new is established, it's always difficult. And looking at Freedom Park as a case study of an altar, it's very important for us as South Africans, firstly, to understand what they are doing with Freedom Park and what the spiritual implications are. And we've been wrestling with this thing as intercessors in the city because we've been praying about this thing since the beginning, and it really seems as if things aren't moving the way that we believe our prayers should move things. And one of the things that I'm wrestling with is, Lord, why don't we see a prevention of such a demonic influence being erected? And one of the things that I believe is that God gives people a choice. And He has to give people a choice. Remember when Elijah went up the hill, he said, choose today who you will serve. Will it be Baal or will it be God? Remember when Israel came into the promised land, God gave them two mountains, one representing blessing, the other one representing the curse. And He said, choose life, but you can choose. And it seems to me that we are in a time in our country where God is giving our country a choice. And He has to give them the room to make that choice. And if that means they choose demons, He has to give them that choice. So I do believe that what we are investing in prayer concerning this project is not wasted. But I do think there's still a process that needs to run where, because it's a national choice that needs to be made. And we do pray that God will help our nation to turn away from the wrong choice that we seem to be making. Okay, firstly, we're going to look at the context of the whole Freedom Park development in Pretoria, the geography, the places of importance, the gateways. And I'm asking the question, why this hill? I always ask, why is a thing situated where it is? Now, I must first say that looking at Salvekop, where Freedom Park is built, we were really blessed by the fact that God spoke to us as intercessors in the city to go and pray on that hill even before we knew something is going to happen on that hill. So we are very much aware that God knows what is going on. In 2000, we had a prayer action in Pretoria. We called it, we prayed about the altars of offense in Pretoria. And for some or other reason, some of our groups just felt we needed to go and pray on Salvekop. So we just did it. There was nothing on Salvekop. We did research about the hill. There's nothing historical on that piece of ground that tells us it is defiled or that the enemy has prepared it for something for his use, which is quite interesting. But the fact is, we've been praying on this hill since the beginning. Now, can you see there? It looks very dull. Freedom Park sits right south. If you see where Church Square is, I've done a nice graphic on here. The dot that I have there is where Salvekop is, and I just want to explain to you how Pretoria functions and works. Pretoria is basically a valley between two rifts or hill formations on the north and the south. And Salvekop sits directly south from Church Square. It is exactly on that axis. Okay, so it is quite a prominent place in that sense. So Church Square is there. You can see the direct line that if you go right south, that's such a difficult thing to see. You can see there's a direct south line that terminates into Freedom Park. And that line goes through the old station building. Was also designed by Sir Herbert Baker. A few years ago, they got some swastika symbols on the building that they didn't know existed, which is quite a part of sun worship symbols. And then we've got the east-west corridor from Church Street. It's important to note that Pretoria was laid out in the form of a mandala, which is also obviously an occultic symbol and has a Freemasonry background. Basically, those are the hills that we have Unisa sitting on a hill, Freedom Park, and then there's another hill left from Freedom Park. On this side, we've got a hill where we've got Fort Klapperkop. Okay, there we've got the Voortrekker Monument on the one hill right next to Salvekop. And then we have our main highways coming into Pretoria. Don't know whether you saw that. It comes in from the south. And what's interesting is to note that Freedom Park sits right in the middle of the two main entrances into the southern point of the city. Okay? Now, if you understand the spiritual dynamics in Scripture, the gateways are very important, spiritually speaking. Scripture even says when the guards are changed at the gate, a great war is released. Okay? So we know they've chosen this hill with a very specific purpose. There we've got the Union buildings right at the top, which has a main access onto the communication tower of Telkom. Okay, and then we have Fountains Valley sitting right in the south at the entrance, where Apis River then flows on the east side of Pretoria through the city. And we have our main entrance for our railway. Not only our main railway into Pretoria, but the new Goud train also directly enters on at that point into the city. So you can see it is a very important and strategic place. And even though this hill, we know, has no spiritual significance in what has happened on it before, as far as we can see, it is very clear that they are trying to make this hill a prominent spiritual spot within the city because of its strategic positioning. Okay. Now the reason I spoke about all those points because they were important for us in our prayer process, but we'll talk about it as we go further. So that's just the picture on its own, so you just get sort of a graphic on how it looks like. Okay, so Salvekop, that's just zoomed in a bit, is this is how the hill looked like before they started developing it. It is right behind a very poor area that was sort of old housing that they had for the railways in the old Transvaal days. And you also see CMAX prison there on the left-hand side. And as I said, it's both the entrance of the old Johannesburg highway. That's why the Voortrekker monument was also built on that side, because that was the main entrance into Pretoria for many years, as well as the new highways that come from the R21 from the airport, and then I think the R51 is the other one's name. Okay, so that's the hill from the top. It's not a excessively high hill, but it is on a very pertinent point. Okay, let's just look at the development principles that were used, why they looked at this hilltop. This comes from Freedom Park's own documentation. Please note your notes is structured differently to what I'm speaking today, but everything that I'm speaking today is in your notes except for one thing, which I will share with you. So you don't need to go through your notes, just listen to what I have to say. Basically, we have the heights allowing for different levels in contact with the surrounding environment. We have the base, which they say would be the citywide connection. The slope, that's a gradual dislocation from the surrounding environment, which increases height and improving views. And then the crest, it's a unique area with the best views of the open sky. That's now sort of the just planning terminology. And on top of this hill, they want to put the memorial, the gathering space, the museum, and the garden of remembrance that we'll look at. Symbolic significance in the placing of the sacrosanct. Now please listen to all the terminology that they use. As Gerda always says, it's quite woolly. That's volarach. It's, what's sacrosanct? That's a term for holy. Okay? So the sacrosanct components goes on to the highest point because that's the furthest from the base, you know, the sort of down to earth things. And that will form the heart, the focal point, and the national flagship of the Legacy Project. Now, all these things are quotes out of their own documentation. I didn't write any of these things. I just took them out and put them into the PowerPoint. Okay, the choice of a hill on the outskirts of the national capital, the site, aims to forge a commanding and inspirational position in the psyche of all South Africans. Woolly. High ground such as this appeals to the spirituality of individuals. So they clearly state the reason why they're placing this development on a hill is because there's a spirituality that they are trying to stir. Okay, and encourages introspection and contemplation. They call this hill the hill in South Africa, the hill. Okay, we have to note that this altar is not a city altar. It's not even a national altar. This is going to be an international altar in every sense of the word. Okay, the hill also has historical connotations which suggest that a meeting place, a venue for the gathering of clans and nations, a place of worship, a step closer to the heavens and to our humanity. Okay, that's idolatry. All the idolatries of the world would tell you the high places. The high places, we need to get closer to the heavens. I don't know how that brings you closer to your humanity, but that's what they say. Okay, the slope between the base and the crest, which is a transitional space, where the journey takes place from the public to the sacrosanct, from the real world to the spiritual world. And that journey, you will see in the design that they've done, from the beginning they stated would be sort of a spiral walk pathway, and that symbolizes your pilgrimage into the spiritual things. Okay? This hill, so through their documentation, it is clear that this hill has a spiritual purpose. Okay? The question is, who's being worshipped? Okay, because if we are working with spiritual things, we have deities, spiritual entities, and we want to know which spiritual entity will be worshipped here. From the beginning, since the beginning when they started this project, they said this would be a space for anybody of any faith to come and pray and, just meditate and whatever. Okay, very woolly. Next, the journey to Freedom Park, and this is their own vision, should be a spiritually uplifting and inspirational experience for its visitors. What spirit is going to uplift? Freedom Park will offer all people a sacred and spiritual space for reflection and commemoration, a symbol of indigenous culture and cultural values. Now they're slipping out with what spirituality we are talking about, okay? It will be a reservoir of knowledge about South Africa's and African historical, cultural, and environmental history, indigenous songs, spiritual ceremony for all humanity. Do you see how they are increasing the influence that they want to bring? It's not just about a little local thing. They want this altar to have an influence on humanity. In the beginning, they spoke about a struggle monument that would just commemorate the struggle, but very quickly they said, no, this is not a struggle monument. This monument will include all the conflicts of South Africa. They've got 8 conflicts, which would be from the Anglo-Boer War to the Anglo-Zulu War to the First World War up to the struggle. All those things are to be commemorated. All those bloodshed are to be commemorated in this spot because they're really trying to increase the influence. Remember what they say about South Africa? We are the cradle of humankind. So we are ready to convince everybody came from South Africa, and all we are doing is we are bringing them back to their roots and their true spirituality. Okay? It says, but also today, and this is now Wally Sorote, he was the CEO of Freedom Park until a few weeks ago. He said, we cast today, by this launch, we cast the same eye into the far distant past to remember our ancestors and to seek counsel from them, so that what we do in the present in no way violates what they stood and fought for. We must remember that our government has implemented a strategy of bringing us into the African Renaissance. Renaissance meaning rebirth. They want to rebirth us into the ancient African things before Christianity. They want to go back to those roots. They say the story of the indigenous people will take pride of place in Freedom Park by acknowledging our ancient ancestors and their sophistication of language, culture, philosophy, and religion. Thereby we can restore the dignity and pride of South Africa's people. So we see their whole purpose is to pull us into that position. I might even just mention we had contact with a lady that was part of a company that did the work on Freedom Park, construction and planning, and they sat in meetings, and from the beginning, she's a Christian, from the beginning she was told this is going to be a place where anybody of any belief and any religion can come and just, pray, meditate or whatever. And as they went on, she started realizing, listen, this is only one thing. This is an ancestral shrine. This is a place to worship the ancestors and the ancestors only. And when she made an objection in one meeting because most of those meetings the Sangomas are part of, because I believe this whole scheme was designed by Sangomas. They had a big competition for what they want to develop on Freedom Park, and they didn't use anything of the competition stuff. You could see they already had a plan, they already knew what they were doing. And these people around the table said to her, "You are a South African, this is your religion." So I want to state this. We have a new state-sponsored religion, and that's ancestral worship. And I'm not joking if I'm saying that. This place has already cost over R1 billion to develop. Okay? Original budget was 750 million rand. Freedom Park, I just want to see. Okay, this will be a place of pilgrimage. Remember what Gerda shared? One of the things that help you to know whether you are working with an altar? Pilgrims. An inspiration for South Africa, Africa, and the world. A celebration of the triumph of humanity. As you'll see in your notes, there are 3 things that they are utilizing at this place. 2 things that's very Western, humanism and evolution. But they are utilizing those 2 Western things to empower ancestral worship. Because evolution gives more proof that we had ancestors. And humanism, again, helps us to honor those that went before us. We just have to understand they now moved on into the spiritual realm. They still exist, but we still need to honor them. Okay, so they are using that Western mix into the ancestral religious mix. Freedom Park will be a place of spiritual revival. What do they want to revive? A place to celebrate South Africa's diversity and wealth of culture, symbolizing hope for all humanity. In its final act, Freedom Park will portray a vision of the future embedded in the African Renaissance. They want to build a future, and that future will be built through the African ancestral religious principles. This is a space for private reflection. Its significance is national and international, as well as deeply personal. They want to be a leading national international icon of humanity and freedom. And then they talk about the history that they will be looking at will span 3.6 billion years. Okay, there we go with the evolution theory. Okay, here we see that they are building a major station for the Goud train. You can get on to the Goud train at the airport and you can climb off at Freedom Park and go and visit this big hill. You can see how accessible they are making it for the international community and how important it is for them to get people there. Okay, basically in the planning process of the Freedom Park project, they said they want to keep 5 visual lines visible at all costs within the development. They want Church Square, the Union Buildings, Klapperkop, Skanskop, and the Voortrekker Monument to be recognized in visual lines. Now, if we work with ley lines, and Gerda will talk about lane lines, it's important for people to acknowledge those things. So when we look at that schematic, that means those 5 things are very important for them in their development. And I want to add one more, and that is the other side of the entrance into Pretoria is where Unisa sits. And God spoke to us about each one of these hills as being an influence. You see, Freedom Park is trying to create a defiled place, or holy in their eyes, but a defiled altar by bringing in things from the outside, because that hill itself has not been claimed through history for demonic purposes. What God said to us was that the Voortrekker Monument is one of the reasons why this hill can be utilized, because if we understand the spirit of witchcraft, it has different manifestations in different cultures. In the white culture, Freemasonry is the manifestation of the witchcraft spirit. Okay, and that's the whole Voortrekker Monument was built on Freemasonry principles. Okay, so we believe that Masonic influence has opened spiritual doors for that region to find entrance for other witchcraft aspects, and this is just now adaptive deception back into the black culture. That was their, some of their framework stuff. Okay, now you can see that they've kept those visual lines open. And as I said, it's interesting, the Voortrekker Monument and Freedom Park has a contract with one another. I mean, if you just talk about politically, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, firstly, that when the new government took over, that they kept allowing the Voortrekker Monument stuff to continue. Secondly, they're now even into a place where they are making agreements with one another to promote one another's sites. The Voortrekker Monument will promote Freedom Park. Freedom Park will promote the Voortrekker Monument. Well, it's the same spirit. The 16th of December was kept as a date. Important. It was an important date to the Afrikaner, but it was kept in the new government. Why? There's just an adaptation, but the spiritual defiled stuff are still continuing. And every 16th of December, they bring the Sangomas onto Freedom Park and they do rituals there. Every 16th of December. It's now called Reconciliation Day. And we know the Voortrekker Monument has its tomb. Okay, there we can see the clear visual line to the UNISA, which I believe UNISA is really, if you go and look at UNISA, UNISA is the African Renaissance University. That's their philosophy. That's what they are promoting. They even have a special department that's in UNISA that's really working to see that thing promoted. Okay, so I believe the intellectual stuff is very strong there. Okay, and then we see the main routes coming in, highways, and that was still when they were constructing the Gautrain tracks. And then on the other side, you see there's Klapperkop on that side with the highway coming in. On this side, Iskor on the old Johannesburg Road. Okay, so firstly, they said they wanted to create a garden of remembrance. Now, the garden of remembrance is the site, and this is what they say, for cleansing, healing, and symbolic reparation ceremonies. Participants in the cleansing, healing processes are usually groups from various religious faiths. Okay, it's a very important element. For the reparation process after apartheid is that a non-racist, non-sexist, and a democratic consensus of South Africa's cultural diversity must set free and express the emancipated African voice and spiritual being. Basically what they are saying, and this is not now talking about political stuff, though they are mixing it with the political, they are saying the spirituality of the Africans needs to be set free because it was hampered by whom? Christianity. Okay, the three pillars of Freedom Park is what we call the Isivivane, the Sukumbutu, and I don't know how to pronounce that because it's a Khoi word. It's probably a click, Kwapo, something like that, museum, okay? We'll talk about them in detail. That's how the development looks like at the moment. Now, interesting that everything is serpentine and round or organic. There's no corners or straight lines, which is quite interesting to see. But the three things on the map, the Isivivane sits right there on the eastern side of the hill. Listen, at the eastern side of the hill. Then we've got the big Sukumbutu, and the museum will be right at the entrance when you enter from the Gautrain. Now the Isivivane, before there was anything on this hill, that's the first thing they established. Now, if you understand the principles of spiritual altars, the first thing that you need to do is to give an open door for the enemy, for the spirit to start possessing, start having some ownership or influence on that place. So before they built anything, they built the spiritual altar on which this thing will hinge. That's how the Isivivane looks like in drawing. Firstly, this is what they say about the Isivivane. It's a sacred space for individual and group spiritual upliftment. It reflects the culture and living beliefs of African forefathers and mothers, and they stated beliefs that are still true. What makes a thing true? Okay, situated on the eastern side of the hill. Remember, all your ancient and pagan religions, the east is very important, the whole thing of the sunrise and the whole sun worship aspects that's connected to that. The Isivivane is the resting place for the spirits of those who died in the struggle. So that's the purpose of that piece of the development is that spirits can go and rest there. Okay? The word viva means to come together as a group, a commitment to solidarity or unity of purpose. It also means an accumulated heap of stones, and was believed to bring good fortune to long-distance travelers by paying homage to the landscape. Boulders, stones and rocks and mountains are associated with the ancestors. People throw stones in the water as a symbol of appreciation and a sign of solidarity with the ancestors. This unity, because that's what they are doing, they are unifying a nation around one religion, the ancestral religion. This unity and solidarity is exactly what Freedom Park aims to achieve. Okay? Then, as we'll see on the photos, they've got some trees planted there. Those trees are specifically chosen. It is the Umlahlankosi trees. It's a type of acacia tree. And each tree was donated by one of the 9 provinces, because this is the tree that you need to use if you want to go and capture a spirit of a deceased person. We had an article, I think in the report a few years ago, I think it was of Lakota, where he was going to places in the Free State, and they had a shoebox, and they would take out the twig of this acacia tree and do the ceremonies to catch the spirit, put this into the shoebox, and they'll drive all the way up to Pretoria, to the Isivivana, and then release the spirit. Okay? It is totally occultic. Okay, and that's how the Isivivana looks like. Okay, interesting that you'll see there at the back that they have water. Remember what I just said about the rocks being thrown into the water as a symbol that you respect or that you honor the ancestors, but it's also there for the purpose of washing your hands, because this is now a holy site and it's all the symbols of cleansing. This spot is viewed as a holy shrine where one can walk barefoot only. You're not allowed to walk here at the bottom if you have not taken off your shoes. Okay? You can see there's children that visited it, they had to take off their shoe. Now the Lesaka is that specific round thing in the middle of the Isivivane. It's a circular formation, and in southern African villages where cattle or sheep were kept, but it was also a place where people were buried. Thus, being a sacred ancestral grave where during crisis people came together to enter into dialogue with the ancestors. Now, right next to the Lesaka, they've got a big tree with benches where you can sit for the elders to come and sit and have their indaba, so that they can be right next to the place where you can dialogue with the ancestors. There are 11 boulders that construct the Lesaka. Each one of them came from a different province, and then there are 2 boulders that represent national and international, national government and international community. Okay, so they're pulling in things to strengthen this thing. It's a symbolic burial ground for heroes and heroines. Does that remind you of anything? Symbolic burial ground, same thing. Okay, and then there you see the Lesaka. To emphasize the cleansing and purity, Lesaka is always shrouded in mist. The steam or the mist in the center of the holy shrine symbolizes what they call impepo, which means talking to the ancestors. So Gerda was yesterday talking about the symbol of smoke, which is a sacrificial thing. But in this instance, it really refers, as long as that mist is going, you can converse with the ancestors. Okay? And there you see it on. Okay, now this is very important, and really I don't have a lot of time to get through all this stuff, but there's a whole African perspective around why this thing is being done, and that's based on the way that the Africans manage death. In a natural type of death, what needs to happen is that the living descendants have the duty to perform acts which promotes the deceased spirit to join the ancestors. So you have to do certain things as a family member to help that spirit that it can join the ancestors. Otherwise, it's going to drift around, and that's not a good thing for those that's staying behind, because they need to find the ancestors and so forth. Okay, so if the spirit can reach the ancestors, then that ancestors and the spirit can become a blessing to you. But if it doesn't, you've got problems. Now, that's why the mourning ceremonies the way they mourn about somebody that dies is very important, because their acts will help that spirit to be joined to the ancestors. You see, the problem is the spirit of the newly deceased person has to go through a process of cleansing. And if it's the older that person is that died, the more things obviously there are in their psyche that needs to be cleansed because they were polluted in their life. And so what we, the people on earth, do, or the family on earth does, helps that spirit to be cleansed in order for that spirit to join the ancestors, because it can't join the ancestors if it's not gone through that cleansing process. 2 sets of rituals are performed by the living in order to help the spirit of the deceased to reach the full cycle of their spiritual life. The first one is to separate the chief mourner from the connection with the spirit of the deceased, so that they can join the community, as they put it. But secondly, to complete the purification of that spirit so that he can join, or whatever, can join the ancestors. The second ritual is also done after a period of time has elapsed, and that is then to integrate that spirit back to the family. But this time, this spirit, once he's joined the ancestors, you invite this spirit with the ancestors back into your home, show them the way to your home so that you can be blessed by their presence and whatever they bring to you as living kin. Now, in unnatural death, where catastrophes happen, where people die, like in the struggle, like in a war situation, it's more complex because there's more pollution on this deceased spirit. And many times it's happened far away from home. So that can create a lot of disaster for family members. And so many times they don't mourn those things openly because there's certain things they need to do to try and prevent that disaster from happening. And that spirit then starts wandering because it can't join the ancestors, because there's nobody that can do the right things to get them back to that position. And this is what Freedom Park is all about, because it's about the struggles in the history. It's about those people that died unnatural deaths. And in their psyche and understanding, they need to help those spirits to find a resting place so that they can join the ancestors, so that the people of the family of those deceased then can receive them back as a blessing. Okay, so this behavior is circumvented if the necessary rituals are performed. 2 rituals are performed in an unnatural death. Specialists, sangomas, who know how to conduct the ritual of transporting the spirit from the area where the tragedy happens. So they do certain rituals and they go and fetch that spirit to bring him back to his home of the family. They bring it back to the gate of the family. Don't take it into the house to show him where the house is. And then they take the spirit to the graveyard. Okay, it doesn't make sense to my Western mind, but that's the thinking. At the same time, the spot where the accident or the unnatural death occurred is then supposedly cleansed by doing certain rituals. Okay, so the Freedom Park, in its efforts to identify and bring back the spirits of those who died in action outside the country, and then to give them a resting place. And they do this through cleansing ceremonies. Okay, so what we see is what you'll see the rituals are that is done mostly at the moment at Freedom Park, is they bring people from those families and then government representation. They basically say it's necessary for both the South African government and the surviving family members of the deceased to visit the hosting country in order to carry out not only the necessary rituals, but also the diplomatic aspects. And what they then do is they perform cleansing ceremonies. The 2 sets of the bereaved have to relive the pain and perform the rituals together. Okay? In so doing, they share the pain of the past in order to shed it and minimize it so as to move forward and adjust themselves to their loss. Such a behavior also assists the spirits of the deceased, which may still be in the spiritual wilderness, to be focused and realize the efforts of their living king and friends to help them to move along. Okay? Woolly. Okay, so there are 2 rituals that are done. Then after they've done the cleansing situation where people are then released from this pain and the spirit is helped. Firstly, the first ritual the host country has to perform in order to release the spirit from their country. So they even went to Zambia and other countries in the world where where ANC cadres went, and they did cleansing rituals there to release the spirit from that land. And then the other ritual is performed is to receive and to transport the spirit to the Isivivane and receive it in South Africa. And Freedom Park says, by bringing back the spirit of those who fell in combat, Freedom Park opens up a space to enable all those who may wish to do so to visit their departed spirits. In addition, in the future, all those who might want to show their departed spirits the way to their homes might take advantage of their presence at Freedom Park. So what they're doing is they are transporting all these spirits to the Isivavana, and you can now come and visit your family member's spirit there. It's now part of the ancestors, and if you want to, you can even then go and fetch them from there and show them the way home so that they can come with the ancestors back to their family wherever they stay. Okay, so the presence, and this is what Freedom Park says, and the future that we are promoting are based on the historical and ancient African wisdom that affirms the humanity of all its citizens. So this is the wisdom that will help us. The second facet of Freedom Park development is what they call the Sikombutu. And this is the major memorial on the crest of Salvokop, constructed as a permanent space to celebrate and communicate the struggle for humanity and freedom. This is how it looks like if you look at it from the air. Strange. Many things reminding you of a womb and of birthing and things like that, but the concept of Sikombutu is drawn from the Siswati nomenclature and signifies only a place of remembrance of those who have passed on, but also a place of invoking their assistance in current and future affairs. Okay. Now, firstly, it consists of a wall of names, 697-meter long wall, and each one of those tiles have a name on it of somebody that died in one of the 8 conflicts in South African history. There's how it looks like. Okay. Then they've got a big amphitheater that they've created to have big meetings and where they have even political stuff going. They've got an eternal flame. Do you know the Voortrekker Monument also have an eternal flame? Okay. That's how it looked like. And it's right there. If you look out of the sanctuary, the eternal flame is in the water. Again, you see the elements in the pagan religions. You've got the water, the fire, the earth, and the air. Okay, and then you've got a gallery of what they call the gallery of leaders. And then you've got what they call the sanctuary. What does a sanctuary mean? A sanctuary is a holy place, a building set aside for worship of the divinity or of one or more deities. Who's being worshipped at this sanctuary? And this is now your inner sanctum, your holy place, the spiritual inner sanctum of the entire Freedom Park precinct. So the altar is the Isivivana, and this is where you've now moved all the way up to the hill in your pilgrimage to reach the Holy of Holies. This spirituality is universal and transcends all divisions. Basically what they are saying, it's higher than Christianity or any other faith. It is the universal aspect. South African spiritual space is the memorial, provides a conducive atmosphere for spiritual rejuvenation. Ouch. Okay, and then there we see that on top of the hill they've got poles all around this Sikombutu. Interesting, this is the tree where the first ceremony was done. Thabo Mbeki himself, 2003, came up to unveil or to open this area up to start construction, and they put up a plaque on this tree. And where does these reeds start? Right on that spot. Okay, you can see there's many of them, and this really comes from the Swazi mythology that Elizabeth told us about, that the reeds are the place where we find birthing. So what they are saying is that they are birthing in New South Africa from this spiritual position, and the reeds are symbolic of that. That's why I believe this also symbolizes a womb. And then the third thing is the museum that they'll be putting up. This will be a place where the historical, cultural, and spiritual past of South Africa comes alive, a place where people are able to reach a new understanding. So they are rewriting everything according to how they believe it should be told to other people. They say through the promotion of indigenous knowledge, this museum aims to emphasize the creativity, inventiveness, resilience, and spirit of our people, thereby emancipating the African voice. And they're going to divide the museum up into 7 epochs. The 7 epochs, the first one will be the Earth, and that will be the whole evolution theory, 3.6 billion years old. And obviously we are stating that we are the cradle of humankind, so, that's a nice position to take. The second epoch will be about the ancestors. This epoch explores the concepts of ancestors from a physical and spiritual perspective. There is recognition of ancestors throughout the ages based on interpretive rationalities and a spiritual component inherent in human beings. And this is what they're going to take our school children to. This is where they're going to go for all their retraining and re-education about what history is really about. Okay, that's the same. Third one, what they call the epoch of peopling, and this will showcase African innovation in science, culture, and spirituality. For more than 4,000 years, communities on the continent had evolved their own cultures, languages, and spirituality. Then they'll talk about the colonization, the conflicts that came from that. Fifth epoch will be industrialisation and urbanisation, where they look at exploitation and the colonisation and the influence on our nation. And then nationalism and the struggle with the apartheid government forming and the struggle against that. And then lastly, what they call nation and continent building, the new future that we need to form for ourselves since 1994. Interesting, Wally Serote himself said 1994 was not a miracle from God. It was simply us, humanity, that we were so clever and good that we solved our problems ourselves. Okay? By relaying this history of our region from an African perspective, we dip into the deep wells of African indigenous knowledge, as well as reservoirs of contemporary Western scientific knowledge. The Klapo is thus a fusion of African knowledge and Western scientific knowledge that tells us what happened on the southern tip of the African continent. Very clever. Now there's different rituals that has been done. I've given you quite a list up to 2007 of what we know about. Let me just state this. Since 2000 we've been praying on this hill. And when we knew they're now going to start developing this thing, we went up that hill one Saturday to go and pray. And God really gave us a lot of things and spoke to us. And we really prayed that God would prevent Satan from really establishing a demonic throne again in our city. And we prayed there. But one of the things we did on the highest point, we buried a Bible. It was so amazing. And when we came down the hill, we walked past Sangomas that were driving up the hill with cattle on the back of their bakkies to go and slaughter it for the ancestors, because they had to do this sacrifice the day before Thabo Mbeki came to open the site up for development. Okay, and what you see there is part of the cleansing ceremonies that they did all across the country, where they also gathered stones, gathered plant material from all 9 provinces, from places where they did rituals, and they did it with just about every imaginable religious group being present and doing their own things. And that's where they burnt muti to bring cleansing. Okay? Whenever the Isivivana is visited, you have 2 Sangomas that do rituals. Whenever it's visited for a specific official purpose. What you see there are the libations that they brought for the ancestors. I didn't know they liked Old Brand Sherry and Fanta, but it seems they do. So you see the calabash, which is also the symbol of the pouring out of the libation for the ancestral spirits. And these Sangomas, with every official visit of anything, there's 2 Sangomas that's doing the rituals. You can see the people don't have their shoes on. School groups visit this place. You can just know what they are being taught. Okay, this was, for instance, in 2009, where they had traditional leaders to honor Nelson Mandela. You can see they're now sitting in that amphitheater, where at the back you've got what they call the sacrosanct holy place, where you now commune with the ancestors also. And that evening, after they had the meeting, what did they go and do? Rituals. Okay, you can't see it. It's very, I don't know why it's not so clear, but they did rituals in the evening at the Isivivana. And I was wondering about, interesting, we've seen a lot of things happen in the day, but what is happening there in the evenings? Just a week ago, that's Helen Ziller. You can see her, she's also not got her shoes on because you can't stand there if your shoes are on. And she's bringing an offering, isn't it? Flowers. That's a form of an offering. And that's now on Freedom Day. And who are we honoring there? Who are we bringing our offerings to? The ancestors. That's the Premier of Gauteng. She brought her offering. Here we see the Deputy President standing next to them. So just last week, this is what they did. Okay, and that is ministering to the altar, ministering to the spiritual entities at that altar, and that's what we call the ancestors. Now she's doing it probably for political gain, but she doesn't understand what she's doing. She's connecting herself to idols, to demonic entities that has access. And that same day, the sangomas, you see there they've got candles that they are burning. It looks like stuff in the bowl that also probably would be burned, and then you also see the libations. Okay, so you never have an official thing happening at the Isivavana if it's not visited by the sangomas in order to probably make a way for the people to commune with the ancestors. Now, I just want to quickly say, and I don't have a lot of time, but we prayed a lot about this hill, and we really prayed on this hill long before they started looking at it to develop it. So I really believe God had a purpose for us to go and pray there. And that even though it's still being developed, I really believe Freedom Park doesn't have a lot of power yet. And they're really doing their best to import things and bring people from Cuba and from all the international politicians. If they come, they take them there. And they even got a place there where they especially built to sign contracts with other nations. And in that area, they've got an area which they paved while they developed it. And the Sangomas complained that that area should not be paved because that's the place where sacrifices will be brought when the contracts are made between nations, between South Africa and other nations. And they need to bring these offerings to the ancestral spirits, and they cannot if the blood does not go into the soil. Okay, but we know God led us supernaturally to play at this place since long before. God gave us Psalm 68 as a scripture, and that's the one where it says, God will arise and his enemies will scatter, and the hills will melt like wax in the presence of the Lord. And we spoke those things, and one of the scriptures that really spoke, let me just read it. God is beginning to rise and his enemies to scatter. Let them also who hate him flee before him. As smoke is driven away, so drive them away. As wax melts before the fire, so let the wicked perish before the presence of God, but let the righteous be glad. Let them be in high spirits and glory before God. Yes, let them rejoice. Sing to God. And then like Elijah that went up to Carmel, I believe the time will come when the power encounter will come where God will have to show himself against this idolatry. And then God gave us verse 16 in Psalm 68. Why do you look with grudging and envy, you many-peaked mountains, at the mountain which God desires for his dwelling? And God said to us, we must pronounce, even before they started construction, this is the hill of the Lord. This must be the mountain of God. And so God gave us a strategy of all the mountains around Pretoria as being hills, and there's spiritual things on those hills that they are trying to project onto Savukop. And so we had a whole prayer action praying on every one of the hills in Pretoria, and God gave us different things. It was a very long process. God gave us Isaiah 65 for Freedom Park. You can go and read that. We had a whole intercession process, and then God said to us, okay, you've done your job. It's now time for the leaders. We said, Lord, we cannot move the leaders. And 2 years later, it just happened to be that at Choose Life, somebody spoke to the pastor there, and he went back to LP, and they said they wanted to know more about Freedom Park. We gave them the information, and praise God, we had all our spiritual leaders, pastors on that hill, I think 2 years ago, and where we repented and prayed, and we believe God will and must deal with this thing. I just want to share this, which is quite interesting. God gave us the picture of Jerusalem, where you had Zion on the south, and the temple in the north, and that this hill must be the hill of the Lord, like David. It was a place where God's presence was established through true worship, and that was the forerunner for the temple that was north of that to be established. And I was just amazed at how it was the same. The Kidron Valley, where we've got the Apis River. You see down here is a fountain, the Enrogel Fountain. Where's Fountain Valley? Where's the entrances? into Pretoria, and it was just interesting that when God gave us the word and said, pronounce this must be the hill of the Lord, a place where the true God is worshipped, a place for his presence. That's what we are praying. We don't know how God's going to get there, because what's there is idolatrous, but we believe God will deal with it. We know who wins at the end. Amen.